people like me who have really earned enormous amounts of money.
The spirit of an age can be captured in its art. So perhaps this is the symbol of all that debt-fueled financial excess. Damien Hirst's For the Love of God. The glittering death's head, encrusted with 8,601 diamonds, is said to have been sold to an investment consortium for £50 million. But the details of its sale are shrouded in secrecy, as are so many of the transactions of the new super-rich. What's its intrinsic value? There's quite an argument about that. Who actually owns it? No one seems quite sure. In many ways, the glitter and the ambiguity seems to capture perfectly the spirit of this age of easy money. One reason why so much cash was pouring into the pockets of the stars of the new financial industries was the pay structure they devised. They wrote the rules of the greed game so they couldn't lose, though it turned out that most of us could. The money-making skills of private equity and hedge fund stars were considered so rare and precious that they were able to charge their backers astonishing fees.
These new breed of fund managers were performing extremely well for their clients. So if you gave them £1 billion, and if they turned it into £2 billion, that's £1 billion profit. They'd take 20% of that as a success fee.
The tradition had been to take 0.5% a year of the backer's money for managing it. But private equity and hedge funds charge much more. A basic fee of 2% a year on all funds under management, plus 20% of all profits. This was jackpot capitalism.
So long as that remuneration structure persists, so it's an asymmetric bet, it's a one-way bet. If he makes a great deal of money, then he gets his 20% plus of it, and if he loses money, it must lose. And I think once you've got that, and that leads to earnings, in some cases, literally hundreds of millions of dollars in the hands of individuals, they're unlikely to change.
If you got a deal that you did for £1 billion, sold for £1.5 billion, made £500 million, you get a 20% carried interest on that, £100 million. You'd probably have taken 30 or 40 million out of it in fees.
The reason private equity charges what are considered to be high levels of fees is there are relatively few people in the private equity world, and there are relatively few new entrants into that world. It's quite a rare combination of skills, and the results, the financial results that the industry is able to deliver to its investors means that the investors are continuing to pay those fees.
Not only were the rewards massive, but the bet was one way. Using borrowed money meant taking 20% of the gains, but leaving all the losses for the original investor. And what began to motivate many wasn't pretty. Do you think greed got the better of some people in that period?
Well, I don't know that it was greed. I think it might have been enthusiasm. And I think in every cycle, it always works the same. People who are doing something keep doing more and more of it. They lose a little of their grounding in terms of the amount of risk that they're taking.
Because the rewards on offer from hedge funds and private equity firms were so huge, the big banks saw much of their talent affect to them. So banks too had to offer their more financially creative employees the opportunity to pocket around 20% of the gains. Individual bankers now had the opportunity to play the greed game with their organisation's money.
It's particularly awe-inspiring when you get back to this central point that the main things which have driven people's ability to earn that remuneration, not every single time, but the majority of cases have been two things: a bull market and access to the bank's capital. It's not their own characteristic.
What's the sort of minimum, you think, in the last 2 or 3 years that a fairly mediocre, middle-ranking trader or investment banker of a big house would be expected to take?
You're probably talking about $1 million bonus in those circumstances.
And how high does it go?
There isn't any limit.
And as the greed game intensified, other professionals joined in. They were eager to facilitate the deals which would reward them rather than ask awkward questions about all that debt that was being heaped on the system.
Everybody else joined in. The investment banks who were selling companies, the accountants who were increasingly doing less and less work to make deals happen quicker and easier, the lawyers who were finding their ways through difficulties by pretending they weren't there. Everybody contributed. It was a big bubble. And people made a lot of money out of doing as many deals, as big a deal, as quickly as they could.
If you were a Wall Street investment banker making $3 million a year, you were on top of the world. You were the master of the universe. Suddenly, that banker making $3 million is looking at the hedge fund guy who he used to work with making $3 billion or maybe $1 billion a year. So it's created this big class warfare and envy between what I call the haves and the have-mores.
Many of the have-mores feel a visceral desire to prove their superiority over the mere haves. So there's quite an industry catering to their needs for those little extras. Meet Charlie, who provides what they want, however eccentric.
Typically use you for something that sounds or as a practical
Oh, it varies. One of the members for his ill son asked for one of the kosher cookers to play with his son in his back garden, which
You were able to arrange
we were
that?
able to
A
arrange
specific
that.
premiership for one? And you were able to arrange
We were
that?
able to arrange that.
Anything more brown? There's no price on it, which is all they need to sort of go back. What do you think it costs?
£8,500.
I would have thought on my BBC salary that's more than affordable.
And we now have requests of submarines.
No, really?
Yeah, so they have their own submarines made into some submarine, which is definitely unique. One of our members came last week asking for a jet garden.
She wanted to get the fights there.
In her garden.
As an ornament.
Yes, that's what she wanted.
Why?
I don't know why. We don't ask. We just say, of course, madam.
We have to come up with more and more extraordinary experiences, whether it be living with a tribe in the Sahara for 6 weeks to challenge yourself and your mental state, through to climbing Everest. We have a Valentine's Day extreme event where you can have supper with the wife or the husband on an iceberg in the Arctic. To walk onto boats that are, boats probably isn't a great description of them, vessels that are larger than most homes that I've been into, that are 200 feet long, that can only go into limited ports because only so many